Imagine this. You wake up in a house that looks like your own, but something is off. The walls breathe like lungs. The mirror over the sink no longer reflects your face. Only a dark silhouette blinking in slow defiance. You walk down the hallway, but every step feels like it erases part of who you thought you were. Family portraits melt into strangers. Childhood trophies rust. Familiar furniture rearranges itself as if mocking the illusion of permanence. Now, picture this. You find a note taped to the front door in handwriting that is unmistakably yours, but which you have no memory of writing. It reads, "Burn it all." That's the only way to leave. Would you strike the match? Would you destroy everything you've built, everything you've believed, in the hope that something more real waits on the other side of the flame? We're told all our lives that growth is a ladder, upward, steady, admirable. But what if that's a lie told by those too afraid to look down? What if the real path forward begins with falling, not climbing? What if transformation isn't about adding layers but tearing them away? What if the person you're trying so desperately to become can only emerge once the person you are now has died? Would you still want to change if it meant annihilating your current self? This is the hidden paradox of self-transformation, that it doesn't begin with creation, it begins with destruction, not the casual kind, not quitting a bad habit or starting a new hobby. We're talking about a rupture so total it leaves you breathless, the demolition of everything that felt stable. Your beliefs, your desires, your identity, your narrative of the past. You've probably felt flickers of it already, that haunting sense that your life, though full, feels scripted, like you're reading lines you didn't write, smiling at scenes you're not really in. You follow routines with military precision, but can't explain why you feel hollow. You succeed in ways others applaud, but sense something vital has gone missing inside you. Like a ghost trailing your steps, whispering, "This isn't it, this isn't you." But here's the problem. Most people turn away from that voice. They silence it with distractions. They sedate it with achievements, relationships, substances, or affirmations. They don't realize that voice isn't a threat, it's the invitation. The knock at the door before the fire begins. Because before you can become who you could be, you must face who you truly are. And that truth is rarely pretty. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Your identity is not sacred. It's a scaffolding, a temporary structure built from fears, coping mechanisms, childhood conditioning, societal expectations, and half-remembered memories. You didn't consciously design it. It happened to you, layer by layer, moment by moment, but now you wear it like a second skin, confusing the costume for the core. What if the real you isn't hiding beneath that structure, but waiting to be born once it's gone? And here's the rub. You cannot renovate a lie. You can't gently remodel a false identity. You must burn it down. That's the entry fee for transformation. The suffering you fear isn't the cost, it's the gate. There is a reason ancient myths always begin in the underworld. There is a reason shamans undergo ego death before vision. There's a reason the phoenix must die in flame before it can rise. Destruction is not failure. It is the dark soil in which truth is planted. So ask yourself, really ask, who would you be if you lost everything you were proud of? What would remain if you erased your name, your job, your persona, your rituals of validation? Could you survive your own obliteration? Or more disturbingly, must you? Because maybe the greatest lie of modern life is that you can find yourself like a misplaced object, But what if the self isn't found? It's forged. And what if the forge is fire, not comfort? You've already seen glimpses of this fire in heartbreak that shattered you, in failure that humbled you, in moments when your mask slipped and the world recoiled. And you thought those were regressions. But what if they were initiations? The worst pain you've ever felt might not have been a detour. It might have been the very path. So now you're standing at the threshold. The match is in your hand. The note, your note, still clings to the door. Burn it all. That's the only way to leave. Will you walk back into the safety of illusion? Or will you strike the flame and watch the self you've clung to vanish, so something real might rise? Because only through death can you begin to live. And this is where the descent begins. You've lit the match in your imagination. You've stood before the door with trembling hands and watched the world you thought was you begin to crumble. But what exactly have you set ablaze? The answer is more unsettling than you think. What burns first is the invisible architecture of your identity, not your name or face, but the scaffolding built quietly over decades, your assumptions, your habits, your roles. It is a framework stitched together by invisible threads, threads woven by family, culture, trauma, repetition, and the primal desire to belong. You didn't choose who you are, you inherited it. This is the first wound of consciousness. To realize the self you've been defending was never fully yours. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear, not just to hide, but to function. It is a necessary fiction. But over time, the fiction starts to feel like the truth. The mask sticks to the skin. You begin to believe you are the mask, but beneath that mask lies something far more ancient, something raw and dangerous. Jung warned that when we over-identify with the persona, we deny the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, fear or disown, the anger, the lust, the ambition, the need, the truth. These exiled parts don't disappear. They rot underground. And in their decay, they poison the soul from beneath. Depression, anxiety, addiction, perfectionism. They are the symptoms of an identity too sanitized, too performative, too afraid of its own depths. So the real problem isn't that people fail to grow. It's that they never shed. Growth without shedding is an illusion. You can read 1,000 self-help books and attend endless seminars, but if your transformation is layered on top of a false identity, then all you've built is a better cage. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly. He wrote of the Übermensch, the overman, not as a superior being, but as one who is overcome, not others, but the self. He warned that morality, tradition, and even reason itself could become prisons if never questioned. He dared to say, "You must become who you are," a chilling paradox. How can you become what you already are? Only by first realizing you are not what you think. And this is where the pain enters. Because when you realize your identity is a patchwork quilt of borrowed thoughts, external validations, and subconscious defenses, you grieve. You grieve the years spent chasing applause that never filled you. You grieve the friends who never really saw you. You grieve the carefully constructed narrative of success that now feels empty. Arthur Schopenhauer described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom, but what he missed is that it also swings between illusion and truth, and the arc of awakening always begins in violence, psychological violence against the complacent self. You may find yourself recoiling. You may hear the voice in your head whisper, "But I like who I am. I've worked so hard to become this." and that may be true. But ask yourself, did you build this self, or were you built by what others needed you to be? Your politeness, your ambition, your fear of confrontation, your tendency to people please or stay silent or overachieve. Are those really you, or are they survival tactics you adopted so early, so often, you forgot you had a choice? Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence, meaning we are not born with a fixed nature. We create ourselves through action, but most never dare to act outside their programming. They perform a role assigned by accident of birth, gender, class, race, religion, and call it freedom. Sartre called that bad faith, living a lie while pretending it's the truth. It is not your fault you were programmed, but it is your responsibility to unprogram yourself. And that's where self-destruction becomes sacred, not as suicide, not as nihilism, but as sacrifice, as alchemical fire, the way a forest must burn for new life to erupt, the way a caterpillar must dissolve completely to become something winged. But we live in a culture that pathologizes this kind of dissolution, that tells you to be positive, to be productive, to keep going. There is no ritual for ego death, no ceremony for the crumbling of identity. When you fall apart, you're sent to therapy or medicated or told to focus on gratitude. But sometimes gratitude is a coffin. Sometimes the most honest thing you can feel is rage, or emptiness, or grief. Aldous Huxley once wrote that most people are not looking for truth, they're looking for comfort. And comfort, he warned, is the enemy of transformation. The culture of consumption, distraction, and self-optimization is a sedative, keeping you just awake enough to function, but never alert enough to ask, is this even real? Because if you ever really asked that question, the whole facade would collapse, and what would be left? Silence, perhaps, or terror, or a flickering memory of who you were before the world told you who to be. This is the hidden problem, the sickness behind the smile. You are haunted by a self that was chosen for you, and every time you conform to it, a part of you dies quietly inside. You don't just need to grow, you need to resurrect. But resurrection, like any rebirth, requires death, not of the body, of the mask, of the scaffolding, of the old gods you worshipped, approval, status, security. That false self must burn in the inner pyre before something truer can rise from the ashes. And the scariest part, no one can do it for you. No book, guru, or lover. You must choose the fire. You must enter it. But what happens after the fire? What is the cost of not choosing it? And how does this quiet illusion shape not just your mind, but the entire culture you live in? The answers lie deeper still, in the consequences you haven't yet seen. Now we descend into that darkness. You go about your day, unaware you're wrapped in chains. They're not cold metal links. You'd notice those. These are woven from ideas, stitched so tightly into your consciousness that you mistake them for skin. Expectations, norms, goals, roles, the soft tyranny of the acceptable. But the cage is real, and the longer you live within it, the more you forget it exists. That's the most dangerous consequence of never choosing self-destruction. You adapt to the prison, you decorate it, you call it your lifestyle. You convince yourself that fulfillment lies in optimizing the space within your cell rather than tearing down the bars. This is how the unseen problem becomes the unseen consequence. You don't just inherit a false self. You begin to serve it, you protect it, you defend it against anything that threatens to expose it, even truth, especially truth. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek once said that ideology works best not when we believe it, but when we follow it without question, when we act as if the world we live in is the only one possible, even when it hurts us, even when it contradicts our deepest instincts. Consider this. How often do you feel the urge to scream but smile instead? How many dreams have you shelved because they didn't seem realistic? How much of your life is driven by what should be rather than what is? These are not minor compromises. They are identity sacrifices. And over time, those small deaths accumulate. You forget the original shape of your soul. You become, as the writer David Foster Wallace described, a skull-sized kingdom of habits, distractions, and automatic thoughts. A ghost riding a machine, too numb to remember it was once alive. The consequence is not just psychological, it's existential. The great existentialists, Sartre, Camus, Kierkegaard, warned of the nausea that arises when a person glimpses the absurdity of the life they're trapped in. That moment when everything familiar feels foreign. The job, the marriage, the conversations at dinner, all of it suddenly seems hollow, like cardboard cutouts on a stage. You stare at your own hands and ask, is this it? But then you suppress it. You scroll, you drink, you rationalize, you power through, and the moment passes. You return to your routines, vaguely unsettled, but too busy to question. That, right there, is the machinery of quiet despair. You don't need a catastrophe to ruin your life. All it takes is numbness, that creeping fog that dulls your vision, lowers your standards, and convinces you that this slow drift is just how life is. This is not drama. This is reality. And neuroscience agrees. Your brain is not wired for truth. It is wired for efficiency. It takes shortcuts, builds patterns, creates narratives. Once a belief is formed, especially about yourself, it becomes encoded not just mentally, but neurologically. These patterns are reinforced over years, forming what neuroscientists call default mode networks. In other words, the more you think and act like your false self, the more your brain locks you into that identity. You become neurologically allergic to change. The cage becomes biological. And yet, this same brain that traps you also holds the key, because neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, demands destruction. It requires discomfort, dissonance, contradiction. These are not errors in the system. They are signs that transformation is possible, but only if you lean in. Most don't, because another consequence of never initiating self-destruction is the loss of authentic suffering. That may sound absurd. Why would suffering be something you'd want? Because without authentic suffering, the kind that cracks you open and forces reflection, you are left with neurotic suffering, the looping, directionless pain of an unlived life. You feel anxious, but can't explain why. You feel tired, no matter how much you sleep. You crave things that don't satisfy. You develop phantom aches and spiritual vertigo. You feel like you're running towards something, but sinking deeper into nothing. This is what happens when the soul knows the truth, but the ego won't listen. So the body rebels, the mind fragments, the heart goes silent, and the world, this society that thrives on your submission, offers you easy answers. Buy this. Try this app. Start this diet. Join this tribe. None of it heals the wound. All of it sedates it. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, wrote that man's greatest need is meaning, not comfort, not safety, not happiness, meaning. And when we are denied real meaning, we will create false ones. We will turn ideology into identity. We will confuse attention with love. We will chase dopamine like it's divine. Frankl warned that when life loses meaning, people do not merely feel bored. They become dangerous, not just to others, to themselves, spiritually suicidal. That's the ultimate consequence of refusing the fire. You become a shell of yourself, functional, polite, and utterly lost. And the world rewards you for it, because a person who doesn't know who they are is easy to control, easy to market to, easy to manipulate. An identity built on insecurity is an economy waiting to happen. The system doesn't want you to burn your false self. It wants you to accessorize it, to brand it, to keep it anxious and under construction so it never rebels. And the longer you comply, the more you forget that rebellion is even an option. But it is. That flicker of pain you feel when you're alone, the restless ache beneath your achievements, that is your soul trying to wake you up. Not to improve, but to break. Not to upgrade, but to erupt. Because the fire is still there. It always has been, waiting for you to stop pretending, waiting for you to realize that the cage never had a lock, waiting for you to burn the illusion and walk naked into the unknown. So the question now is not, what am I becoming? It's this, what is the cost of staying asleep? And the answer is waiting in the rebellion. Let's be honest. You don't want another affirmation. You don't want another checklist. You don't want to optimize your morning routine or visualize your goals. What you want, what you ache for in the marrow of your being is freedom. Not the polished, marketed kind. Not the kind sold through self-help seminars or hustle culture mantras. You want the raw, terrifying, glorious liberation that only comes when everything false burns away. This is not about self-improvement. It's about self-annihilation. Because rebellion, real rebellion, is not external. It's not screaming at the world or quitting your job or deleting social media. That's just smoke. The true fire is internal, quiet, private, savage. The rebellion begins the moment you stop lying to yourself. The moment you say, "This is not who I am, and I will no longer defend it." That's where the demolition starts. But rebellion isn't just a breaking. It is also a remembering of the ancient truth that you are not your story, you are not your conditioning, you are not the image in the mirror or the voice in your head. You are what's left when all that's stripped away. But getting there, that takes war. First, you must question everything, every belief you hold sacred, every habit you've normalized, every identity you cling to like armor. Ask, where did this come from? Who does this serve? What part of me dies every time I obey it? Not every answer will come easily. Some won't come at all. That's the point. You are not trying to understand your cage. You are trying to escape it. This requires radical honesty, not polite introspection, not journaling about your goals, but the kind of inner reckoning that leaves your stomach twisted and your mouth dry. You must be willing to find the parts of yourself you've buried, the rage, the envy, the hunger, the despair, not to act them out, but to reclaim them, to own them, to see that every piece you rejected was not your flaw, it was your fuel. Carl Jung said it plainly. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Second, you must renounce safety, not physically but psychologically, the comfort of certainty, the warmth of predictability, the soothing lie that everything is okay if you just keep going. You must give up the illusion that you will one day arrive. There is no arrival, there is only shedding. There is only truth. And truth, as Nietzsche warned, will often feel like madness before it feels like liberation. Look to history, and you'll see this pattern etched in blood and flame. Siddhartha Gautama walked away from his palace and his name to sit under a tree and face the void within. Jesus wandered into the desert and emerged with a fire no empire could extinguish. Socrates drank poison rather than betray his inner compass. These were not acts of comfort, they were acts of holy defiance. Not defiance against others, defiance against the false self. Rebellion means disobedience to what is killing you, but you will be tempted to retreat. You will hear the voices of well-meaning friends, therapists, even your own family whispering, "Don't go too far. Don't lose yourself. Don't break everything." But here's the truth. The parts of you worth saving will survive the fire. The rest must burn. Third, you must create ritual around your destruction. The modern world gives you no ceremony for rebirth, so you must invent one. Burn the journals. Shave your head. Get the tattoo. End the relationship. Quit the job. Climb the mountain. Stand in front of the mirror and scream. Do something symbolic, something real, that tells your nervous system, "I am done pretending," because unless you mark the transition, the past will try to crawl back in through the cracks. You must seal the threshold with your blood. And then you begin the reconstruction, but this time from the inside out, not with what is expected, but with what is true. Maybe that means doing less. Maybe that means saying no. Maybe that means embracing solitude. Maybe it means writing, dancing, walking into the forest at night, and listening for something older than language. You will feel lost at first. That's how you know you're on the path. The rebellion will be lonely. It will be misunderstood. It will cost you things you thought you needed, status, approval, certainty. But in their place, it will give you something so rare, so precious, that most will never touch it. Authenticity, not a brand of it, not a curated version for others to admire. The real thing, the kind of authenticity that radiates from your bones and makes people uncomfortable. Not because it is cruel, but because it is free. And freedom, in a world addicted to performance, is threatening. You will make people nervous. Good. That's how you know you're no longer trapped by their expectations. That's how you know the mask is gone. But don't mistake rebellion for rage. Eventually the fire cools. Eventually the storm clears. And what remains is not bitterness, not bravado, but clarity. You begin to live from something still and fierce. You begin to make choices not from fear or guilt or image, but from alignment. You stop apologizing for your truth. You stop begging to be understood. You begin to walk like someone who has died before and came back with eyes that see through walls. Because that's what you are now. A survivor of your own undoing. A quiet warrior. A walking contradiction, soft and indestructible. Empty and full, broken and whole. And perhaps in your rebellion, others will see a mirror, not of what they are, but of what they could become if they dared to stop clinging, stop mimicking, stop obeying. That is how you become dangerous, not by controlling others, but by no longer being controlled. So if you've come this far, there's only one question left. Will you finish what you started? Will you step fully into the fire, knowing you may not return as the same person? Will you finally become not what they told you to be, but what you already are beneath the ash? There is only one step left, the final step. And it is not about rebellion. It is about revelation. Imagine standing in a vast field after a wildfire. The air is still heavy with smoke, the ground beneath you cracked and blackened. All that once flourished is now ash, silent, fragile, and seemingly dead. Yet beneath this destruction, new life stirs. Seeds, dormant for centuries, sense the clearing light and the fresh rain. Roots untangle and reach toward the surface. A faint green shoots upward, defying the ruin. This is the paradox of destruction. It is both end and beginning. So it is with your self-transformation. You have burned the old you, painful, terrifying, necessary. Now comes the revelation. Here at the edge of ruin lies the ultimate truth. You are not a fixed being. You are not the sum of your memories, your failures, your roles, your beliefs. You are a process, a constant becoming. The philosopher Heraclitus whispered this across millennia. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Your identity is not a statue carved from stone. It is a river flowing, endlessly changing, endlessly destroying and creating. This means everything you thought about stability, about finding yourself, is a lie. You will never find a self that is permanent. You can only choose to be reborn, again and again. Every destruction you endure is an invitation to transcend the previous limit of your being. Every death of the old self is a doorway to a deeper freedom. But this freedom is not a destination. It is a state of surrender. You surrender control, not to external forces, but to the fluidity of life itself, to the uncertainty, to the mystery, to the fact that to truly live, you must embrace that you are always incomplete. This is the greatest paradox you face. By surrendering the illusion of a solid self, you become whole. By letting go of certainty, you gain clarity. By walking into the fire and accepting your destruction, you are finally free. Think of it like this. The self is a phoenix. It must burn itself to ashes, not once, but 1,000 times. And each time it rises, it carries more light, not from the past it clings to, but from the fire it walked through. This is not just metaphor, it is a psychological and spiritual law. It is the secret whispered by mystics and madmen alike. It is the reason why those who claim to have arrived often fall into despair, because arrival means stagnation, and stagnation means death. But you are alive, because you refuse to stop becoming. There is no end to the journey, only eternal transformation. This realization frees you from the crushing weight of your past mistakes, your traumas, your regrets. They no longer define you. They are simply chapters, not the book, and you, the writer, hold the pen. But more than that, you hold the fire. This is why the title, Self-Transformation Begins with Self-Destruction, is not a call to nihilism. It is an invitation to brave the abyss, to embrace the chaos within, to walk willingly into the unknown, because on the other side lies not emptiness, but truth. The truth that you have always been more than your fears, your limitations, your false selves. The truth that freedom is not something you gain, it is something you reveal. The truth that your greatest power comes from being willing to let go, and in that letting go you become something unimaginable, a living paradox, a soul set aflame, a river that flows forever. So now the question is no longer about transformation, it is about faith. Faith in the fire, faith in your own destruction, faith that from the ashes you will rise, not as who you were, but as who you were always meant to be. And in this faith, the revolution begins.